November 1944. A biting wind sweeps in from the Atlantic, cutting through the thin gray fabric of the Wehrmacht uniforms like a razor. 217 men stand in a rigid formation on the gravel parade ground of Camp Patrick Henry in the state of Virginia. Their faces are the color of ash, their eyes sunken deep into skulls that seem too large for their shrunken bodies. The skin stretches tight over their cheekbones, translucent and fragile. They stand in absolute silence, a silence so heavy it feels physical, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of boots on frozen ground and the distant, hollow barking of guard dogs. But this silence is a deception. Inside the chest of every man in that line, a scream is building. Lance Corporal Hans Müller, who is only 19 years old, clenches his fists at his sides so hard that his fingernails bite into the calloused skin of his palms. He knows what is going to happen today. They all know. The rumors have been spreading through the barracks for the last week, passed in terrified whispers from bunk to bunk in the dead of night. Rumors that the Americans are tired of feeding useless mouths. Rumors that the war in Europe has turned too brutal, and now the Allies have decided to pay back blood for blood. Hans looks up at the towering wooden watchtowers, at the heavy machine guns, swiveling slowly to track them, and he thinks of his mother back in Dresden. He wonders if she will ever receive the letter he wrote last night by the light of a stolen match and hid beneath his mattress. It is unlikely. Today, they are being marched to the special barracks. That is what the guard sergeant called it yesterday evening, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. The special barracks. Hans has heard stories of the showers on the Eastern Front. He has heard of mass executions in forest clearings. And now, standing on this foreign soil, thousands of miles from the ruins of his home, he is certain that his time has come. Before we step into the darkness of that day, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. It really helps support these untold stories. What is about to happen in the next few hours will not just break Hans Müller and his 200 comrades. It will shatter their entire understanding of reality. They are steeling themselves for a bullet to the back of the neck, but they are walking blindly into an ambush of a very different kind. They are about to collide with the American holiday of Thanksgiving. To understand the sheer suffocating weight of the terror gripping Hans that morning, we have to go back 6 weeks. We have to understand the journey that stripped away his humanity layer by layer. The surrender had been humiliating enough. Hans had been part of a tank crew that ran dry of fuel in a muddy field in France. When the American Shermans crested the hill, Hans and his crew did not even have the dignity of firing a shot. They just raised their hands, trembling in the rain. But the capture was not the worst part. The worst part was the stories. The indoctrination officers had drilled it into them for years. They were told that Americans were gangsters, mongrels raised in the violent alleys of Chicago and New York, men without honor or culture. They were told that in captivity, they would be starved, worked to death in uranium mines, or simply liquidated when the logistics of feeding them became too troublesome. And so far, everything had gone exactly according to that dark prophecy. The transport across the Atlantic on the Liberty ship had been a descent into hell. 3 weeks in a cargo hold, packed so tight that if one man fell, he would not hit the floor. The air was thick, a physical soup of unwashed bodies, vomit, and the metallic tang of sheer panic. The constant groan of the ship's screw and the hammering of the waves against the hull drove men to madness. Food was scarce, just enough to keep their hearts beating, but not enough to stop the gnawing pain in their bellies. The biscuits were hard as granite, The water tasted of rust and oil. Hans had lost nearly 20 pounds during the crossing. When they finally docked in Norfolk, they were met not as soldiers, but as cattle. Harsh shouts, the prod of rifle butts, the humiliation of being stripped naked and sprayed with harsh chemical powder, making them feel like diseased livestock. Then came the train. The windows were painted black, a simple measure to prevent them from signaling to anyone, or perhaps to keep the American populace from seeing the enemy in their midst. But inside the cramped carriages, the darkness bred paranoia. An old non-commissioned officer named Klaus, who had lost an eye in North Africa, whispered in the darkness that the blacked-out windows were to hide their destination. He claimed they were being taken to secret facilities for medical experiments. Hans believed him. In the dark, hungry and terrified, he believed everything. Why wouldn't he? Were they not the enemy? Does war not cancel out all morality? And so they arrived here. Virginia, a camp surrounded by a double layer of barbed wire that hummed with tension. And then, this morning, the final confirmation of their doom arrived. The order was unusual. Wash, shave, put on your cleanest uniform. The sergeants moved down the lines, inspecting chins for stubble, checking buttons. Why? Why waste soap and water on men you despise? The answer struck Hans with the force of a physical blow, freezing the blood in his veins. This is what you do to an animal before a sacrifice. Or perhaps they wanted to take propaganda photographs of the corpses. They wanted to be able to say, look, they were clean, they were well treated, they simply died of natural causes. Hans's hands shook uncontrollably as he fastened the buttons of his tunic. His friend Fritz, standing next to him at the communal trough, was pale as a sheet. Fritz whispered, barely moving his lips, that he had seen crates being carried into the kitchen building. Not food crates, Fritz said. They were too heavy. Maybe it is quicklime? To cover us in the mass grave? Hans did not answer. He stared at his own reflection in the clouded mirror and said a silent goodbye to the 19-year-old boy staring back at him. Forward march. The command cracks like a whip across the cold morning air. The column begins to move. Their legs feel heavy, leaden. They are not marching toward the work zones where they usually broke rocks or cleared timber. They are marching toward the administrative sector, toward a large wooden building that looks like an assembly hall. The windows of the building are draped with heavy canvas. Not a single beam of light escapes from within. But something else does escape. A smell. Hans inhales sharply. It is a strange scent. It does not smell like the camp sludge of boiled cabbage and rot. It is thick, heavy, and rich. Roasted meat? No, something more complex. Sage, thyme, hot fat. Hans's stomach contracts in a painful spasm. Hunger wars with fear. This is the final trick, he thinks. They will lure us in with the scent of food, herd us inside like sheep, bolt the doors, and then the gas will come, or the machine guns will open up from the balcony. The column halts in front of the massive double doors. The American guards flanking the entrance are not holding their rifles at the ready. They are standing at attention, in dress uniform. Their boots are polished to a mirror shine. Their ties are knotted with mathematical precision. It is the solemnity of a funeral. Hans is certain of it now. This is a ceremony of execution. An officer by the door nods once. Two soldiers step forward and throw the doors wide open. A wave of bright, warm electric light slams into their eyes, blinding them after the gray gloom of the yard. Hans squints, blinking rapidly, tears forming in the corners of his eyes as he tries to focus. The first thing he sees are long rows of tables, but they are not the bare, splintered planks they are used to eating off of. These tables are covered in white cloth, real fabric, stark white and spotless, And on the tables, there is food, mountains of food. Hans takes a stumbling step forward, his knees nearly giving way. He cannot process the visual information. It must be a hallucination brought on by starvation. It is impossible. In the center of every table sits a massive golden-brown bird. Turkeys. They glisten under the lights, their skin roasted to a perfect crisp. Surrounding them are bowls piled high with mashed potatoes that look like white clouds, swimming in pools of thick, dark gravy. There are platters of bright orange sweet potatoes, green beans studded with chunks of bacon, bowls of ruby-red cranberry sauce that quivers like jelly, and bread. Fresh white bread, sliced into thick wedges, and beside it, blocks of yellow butter. Real butter, not margarine or lard. 217 men freeze on the threshold. Not a single one dares to cross the line. The silence in the hall becomes deafening. They look at the food, then at the guards, then back at the food. It feels too cruel to be a prank. It is a torture of hope. In the center of the room, on a small dais, stands an American colonel, and beside him, a chaplain. The colonel gestures with an open hand, inviting them in. "Come in, sons," he says, his voice booming. The translator standing nearby repeats the command in German, but his voice trembles. The prisoners begin to shuffle in, moving sideways, shoulders hunched, waiting for the blow to fall. Hans sits at the edge of the nearest table. He is afraid to touch the tablecloth, afraid to soil it with his hands, which, despite the scrubbing, still feel dirty to him. Across from him sits Klaus. The old soldier is staring at the turkey in front of him with an expression of sheer religious terror. Klaus looks up at Hans, his one good eye wide and watery. "It is the poison," he whispers. "They have poisoned it. It is the only explanation. Why else would they give this to us? Why would they feed us better than our own Kaiser fed his generals?" Hans looks at the food. The steam rising from the mashed potatoes carries the scent of butter and salt, and it makes his jaw ache. If it is poison, Hans thinks, then let it be poison. It is a better death than the gas. He watches as the American colonel takes a seat at the head table. The colonel picks up a knife and fork. He cuts a piece of turkey, puts it in his mouth and chews. He swallows. He smiles. Then he nods to the men. "Eat," he says. "It is Thanksgiving," the translator explains. Thanksgiving, a day to give thanks. Hans does not understand. Give thanks for what? For being captured? For losing the war? But his hand moves on its own. He reaches out and touches the roll of bread. It is soft. It is warm. He tears off a piece and puts it in his mouth. The taste explodes on his tongue. It is sweet, yeasty, rich. It tastes like a memory of a life he thought was gone forever. He swallows, and the warmth travels down his throat, hitting his empty stomach with a shock. He looks around. Other men are starting to eat, tentatively at first, taking small bites, watching each other to see if anyone drops dead. But no one dies. They only weep. Across the hall, a young prisoner drops his fork with a clatter. He buries his face in his hands, and his shoulders begin to shake violently. He is sobbing, not from grief, but from the sheer, overwhelming shock of kindness. An American guard, a young man no older than Hans, steps forward. Hans tenses, expecting a blow from a baton. Instead, the guard places a hand on the prisoner's shaking shoulder. It is a gentle touch. "Easy, buddy," the guard says softly. "Eat up. You're okay." Hans watches this impossible interaction. A conqueror comforting the conquered. A jailer comforting the prisoner. It breaks something inside Hans. The wall of hatred and fear that had been built brick by the propaganda machine begins to crumble. He looks at his plate. He heaps it with potatoes and turkey. He eats until his stomach hurts, and then he eats more. For the first time in months, the cold knot of fear in his chest loosens. He looks at the Americans walking among the tables, refilling pitchers of iced tea and coffee. They are not the monsters from the posters. They are men. Some of them look bored. Some look amused. Some look sad. But none of them look cruel. As the meal progresses, a strange transformation takes place in the hall. The rigid posture of the prisoners relaxes. The silence is replaced by the clatter of silverware and the low hum of voices. Hans finds himself looking at the guard standing near their table. The guard catches his eye and nods. Just a small nod, man to man. Hans nods back. It is a small gesture, insignificant in the grand scheme of the war, but for Hans, it is monumental. It is the first time in years he has been acknowledged as a human being by someone not wearing a German uniform. The meal ends with pumpkin pie. Hans has never tasted pumpkin pie. It is strange, spicy, and sweet. He eats every crumb. When they are finally ordered to stand and return to the barracks, there is no shouting. The guards seem more relaxed too, perhaps affected by the shared act of breaking bread. As they march back out into the cold Virginia air, the world looks different to Hans. The barbed wire is still there. The watchtowers are still there. But the monster he thought was guarding him has vanished. In its place are people who, for reasons he cannot yet comprehend, decided to share their feast with the enemy. The days that follow the Thanksgiving feast turn into weeks, and the weeks into months. The special barracks never materialized. The executions never happened. Instead, a routine settles over Camp Patrick Henry, but it is a routine colored by the memory of that meal. The psychological hold of the Third Reich on these men begins to slip. It is hard to believe that your enemy is a devil when he passes you a bowl of stuffing. It is hard to believe that your culture is superior when the decadent Americans have the logistics to feed prisoners like kings, while your own family starves back home. Hans is assigned to a work detail at a local cannery nearby. Every morning they are loaded onto trucks and driven through the Virginia countryside. Hans watches the world go by through the slats of the truck bed. He sees farmhouses with smoke curling from chimneys. He sees children playing in yards. He sees a land that has not been touched by bombs. It is peaceful. It is prosperous. It is everything Germany is not. One Tuesday in December, a blizzard strikes. The snow comes down in sheets, burying the roads. The truck carrying Hans and his detail slides into a ditch miles from the camp. The engine stalls and refuses to restart. The American sergeant in charge, a man named Miller, swears and kicks the dashboard. He climbs out, his boots sinking deep into the snow. He looks at the prisoners huddled in the back, shivering under the canvas cover. It is 10 degrees below zero. "We cannot stay here," Miller shouts over the wind. "We will freeze to death before a recovery vehicle gets here. There is a farmhouse about a mile back. We are walking." The prisoners climb down. They are guarded by Miller and one other private, 2 Americans with M1 rifles against 20 Germans. In the chaos of the storm, they could run. They could overpower the guards and disappear into the whiteout. Hans looks at Klaus. Klaus looks at the guards. No one moves. No one runs. They fall in line behind Sergeant Miller and trudge through the snow. They are not marching as prisoners now. They are just men trying to survive the cold. They reach the farmhouse, a modest white structure with a wraparound porch. Miller pounds on the door. An old woman opens it, wiping her hands on an apron. She looks at the shivering Americans. then at the 20 Germans in gray coats standing behind them. She does not scream. She does not slam the door. She opens it wider. "Get them inside," she says. "All of them." They crowd into the living room. It is small and warm, smelling of wood smoke and baking bread. The old woman, Mrs. Gable, starts boiling water. She brings out blankets. She does not have enough for everyone, so she cuts up old quilts and hands out strips of heavy fabric for them to wrap around their freezing hands and ears. She makes coffee, gallons of it. She serves the Americans first, then the Germans. She moves among them, pouring steaming black liquid into mugs, teacups, even jam jars. Hans holds a jar of hot coffee in his frozen hands, the heat seeping into his bones. He watches Mrs. Gable. She is humming a hymn as she works. She asks Miller if the boys are hungry. Miller nods. She goes to the pantry and brings out jars of preserved peaches and a loaf of bread. She apologizes that she does not have more. Hans watches her slice the bread. He thinks of the propaganda posters in Berlin that showed American women as frivolous, selfish creatures. Mrs. Gable hands him a slice of bread with a spoon of peaches on it. "You look too skinny, boy," she says to him. "Eat that up." Hans does not speak English, but he understands the tone. It is the tone his mother used. Tears prick his eyes again. He is sitting in the enemy's living room, while the enemy's snowstorm rages outside, eating the enemy's peaches, and he has never felt safer. Sergeant Miller sits by the fire, his rifle leaning against the wall, ignored. He takes out a pack of cigarettes and offers one to Klaus. Klaus accepts. They smoke in silence for a moment. Then Miller asks, in broken German, "Where are you from?" Klaus says, "Munich." Miller nods. "I have family in Stuttgart," Miller says. "My grandparents came over in 1910. Klaus looks at Miller with wide eyes. "You are German?" Miller shakes his head. "I am American, but my blood is German. We are cousins, maybe." Klaus laughs, a dry, rasping sound. "Cousins," he says. "Cousins shooting at cousins. It is a mad world." Miller nods. "Yeah, mad." Hans listens to this exchange. The lines are blurring. The definitions of us and them are dissolving in the heat of Mrs. Gable's wood stove. The storm clears by evening. A recovery truck arrives to pick them up. As they leave, Mrs. Gable stands on the porch. The German prisoners, 20 men who were trained to conquer the world, take off their caps. One by one, they bow to the old woman. "Thank you," Hans says in English. It is the only phrase he has practiced. Mrs. Gable smiles. "Be safe, boys," she says. "Go home to your mamas." Spring of 1945 arrives. The news from Europe is grim for the Germans, but glorious for the world. The Third Reich is collapsing. Hans reads the newspapers that the guards leave behind. He sees the pictures of the concentration camps being liberated. He sees the piles of bodies. He sees the skeletons in striped pajamas. At first, the prisoners in the barracks deny it. It is propaganda, they say. Fake photos. But deep down, Hans knows. He remembers the hate in the speeches of his leaders. He remembers the special barracks fear he felt that first day. He realizes that the monster he was fighting for was real. But it wasn't the Americans. It was his own government. The realization is a heavy stone in his gut. He feels shame. Deep, burning shame. He has been fed, clothed, and treated with dignity by the very people his country wanted to enslave. He works harder at the cannery. It is his penance. He fixes the machines when they break, using his skills as a tank mechanic. He organizes the other men to work more efficiently. He wants to give something back. He wants to prove that he is not the monster in the photographs. May 1945. The war in Europe ends. The camp commander gathers them in the assembly hall, the same hall where they had Thanksgiving. He announces the surrender. Germany has fallen. There is no cheering from the prisoners, just a heavy, stunned silence. Some men weep for their lost country. Others weep for relief that the killing is over. Hans sits quietly. He feels a strange emptiness. He is free from the war, but he is a man without a nation. His home is rubble. His cause was a lie. What is left? Sergeant Miller finds him later by the fence. "It is over, Hans," Miller says. "You will be going home soon." Hans looks at the Virginia hills, green and lush in the spring sun. "Home?" Hans repeats. "I do not know if I have a home anymore." Miller claps him on the shoulder. "You are alive, kid. That is a start. Build a new home. Build a better one." The repatriation process is slow. It takes almost a year before Hans stands on the deck of a ship bound for Bremerhaven. He is wearing a new suit of civilian clothes given to him by the U.S. Army. In his pocket, he has a small amount of American currency, his earnings from the cannery work. But his most valuable possession is inside his bag. It is a small leather-bound Bible. On the inside cover, in shaky handwriting, it says, "For the boy who liked peaches. God bless. Mrs. Gable." Hans watches the American coastline fade into the mist. He is leaving the land of his captivity, the land of his enemy. But he does not feel hatred. He feels a profound, aching gratitude. He arrived expecting to find the devil, and instead, he found Mrs. Gable. He arrived expecting death, and he found Thanksgiving. Epilogue, 1984, Cincinnati, Ohio. An older man sits in a comfortable armchair in a suburban living room. His hair is white, his face lined with the passage of years. This is Hans Müller. He did not stay in Germany. He returned to the rubble of Dresden, found his mother miraculously alive, and spent 5 years rebuilding their lives. But the pull of the place that had saved him was too strong. In 1952, he applied for immigration. He returned to the United States, not as a prisoner, but as a citizen. He worked as a mechanic, then opened his own auto repair shop. He married an American girl named Sarah. They have 3 children and 7 grandchildren. The house smells of roasting turkey. It is Thanksgiving. The dining room table is set with a white cloth. The family is gathering. Laughter rings out from the kitchen. Hans struggles out of his chair and walks to the window. He looks out at the street, at the American flag waving on his neighbor's porch. He touches the small, worn Bible that sits on the mantelpiece. He opens it to the inscription. Mrs. Gable has been gone for 30 years, but he still talks to her sometimes. He whispers a thank you, not just for the peaches, but for the lesson. Hans walks into the dining room. His grandson, a 10-year-old boy named Michael, is looking at the massive turkey in the center of the table. "Grandpa," Michael asks, "why is Thanksgiving your favorite holiday? Is it because of the food?" Hans places a hand on the boy's shoulder. He looks at the bird, golden and steaming, and for a second, he is 19 again, standing in a brightly lit hall in Virginia, waiting to be executed and being handed a plate of salvation instead. "No, Michael," Hans says, his voice thick with emotion. "It is not the food. It is the mercy. It is the day I learned that even when the world tells you to hate, you can choose to feed your enemy instead. And that, my boy, is the only way to truly win a war." Hans takes his seat at the head of the table. He clasps his hands, he bows his head, and he begins to give thanks.